Hello and welcome to today's SCDN Policy Connection webinar on diversity, equity, and inclusion, practical guidance for communities. My name is John Ukenya, and I am the Senior Director of Policy and Strategic Initiatives at Sustainable Pittsburgh. As a reminder, this webinar will be recorded and these materials will be shared after today's program. Please submit any questions via the Q&A box and we'll answer at the end. Feel free to enter your name and organization into the chat so folks know who's in attendance. As always, we strive to create a welcoming environment for all participants and encourage everyone to engage with respect and courtesy. Constructive discussions and diverse perspectives are valued, and we ask that all interactions remain professional and considerate. By participating in this webinar, you are helping to foster a positive experience where everyone can learn and contribute meaningfully. Next slide, please. At Sustainable Pittsburgh, our mission is to empower decision-making that builds a fundamentally equitable, resilient, healthy, and prosperous region. We are doing that through connecting our stakeholders in networks we host, such as the Sustainable Community Development Network, SCDN, which you're here today, to share knowledge of sustainability through resources and experiences to help make a region where all people may succeed. Sustainable Pittsburgh is committed to building the knowledge, perspective, and ability needed to create a better tomorrow for our region. We're optimistic, having worked with nearly 1,000 businesses, communities, and organizations to take action using our customized frameworks to track progress and simultaneously advance social equity, environmental stewardship, and prosperity. The strategic networks we host leverage the collective expertise and diverse perspectives within our region to ensure our communities can meet our challenges today and thrive into the future. That is why we've invited you all to attend today as part of our Sustainable Community Development Network, to learn together so we can act together. And together is how we co-create a fundamentally equitable, resilient, healthy, and prosperous region. Next slide, please. First, we would like to thank our silver sponsor, Pitt, Ohio, for their support of Sustainable Pittsburgh to make programs like this possible. Next slide. And we'd also like to extend our gratitude to our bronze partners as well for their ongoing support. Next slide. For our agenda today, we're going to start with a quick overview of Sustainable Pittsburgh recognition programs. These are frameworks for municipalities, businesses, and other organizations to track and measure sustainability progress. Next, we'll get into an introduction on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Then we'll hear from Matthew Yohe of Vibrant Pittsburgh, who will ground the conversation in key definitions, clarifying what diversity is and who's included, while distinguishing between surface level and deeper, meaningful DE&I efforts. Matthew will also touch on the business case for DE&I and the benefits of employee engagement. Next, we'll hear from Joshua Ash of the University of Pittsburgh School of Law, who will go over the legal implications of DE&I and how to address them. He will talk through the process of defining a goal, understanding barriers, and working towards a solution. After that, Janine Cristiano from the Government Alliance on Race and Equity will discuss the importance of being an effective public servant and providing an overview of GARE's mission to advance equity in government. She will explore demographic shifts in rural Pennsylvania, highlighting how diversity strengthens communities, and offer tools and resources to support DE&I efforts. Lastly, we'll come back around for a Q&A session with all of our speakers. As a reminder, please use the Q&A box for any questions you may have. I will now pass it over to my colleague, Sawyer Seilinger, who will talk us through Sustainable Pennsylvania.
Hello. Thank you so much, John. To kick things off, I'll be starting to share a little bit about the Sustainable Pittsburgh recognition programs. We have 4 programs, 3 for businesses in the Southwestern Pennsylvania 10-county region, the Sustainable Pittsburgh Shop Program tailored for small retail businesses, Sustainable Pittsburgh Restaurants, suited for food businesses, and Sustainable Pittsburgh Workplace, a catch-all for those that are not restaurants or shops. We also offer the Sustainable Pennsylvania program created for municipalities across the state. Since we will be discussing DE&I today, I wanted to highlight that each of these programs features actions to support DE&I efforts. More generally, these programs offer a step-by-step process to track and measure sustainability progress as a framework that organizations can use to drive measurable impact while providing recognition for their sustainability achievements. Programs are based on market-selected practices and have been peer-reviewed by knowledge experts. Programs are fluid and changing based on changes in needs, opportunity, landscape, opportunities for impact. Recognition comes in the form of bronze, silver, gold, and platinum levels of designation or certification that is based on overall sustainability performance on an online assessment through a unique portal offered by Sustainable Pittsburgh. To date, participation includes over 400 businesses, organizations, and municipalities, with dozens more working through the process. As many of you here are representative of the municipal audience, I'll share a bit more about Sustainable Pennsylvania Certification Program. It's managed by Sustainable Pittsburgh in partnership with the Pennsylvania Municipal League. The program provides strategies, resources, and recognition to municipalities, improving quality of life and expanding opportunities for everyone. It covers a comprehensive set of sustainability topics and provides step-by-step guidance for how your community can advance performance in areas such as waste and materials management, economic development and revitalization, parks and land conservation, as well as several other topics that can help build more vibrant and resilient communities. Spanning across the state, we currently have 138 municipalities that have earned their Sustainable Pennsylvania certification. The Sustainable Pennsylvania program offers several benefits. First and foremost, it can help you baseline your municipality's current sustainability performance, as well as serve as an action plan for advancing your efforts. To help you advance your progress, the program also offers resources and tools and best practices developed by over 60 advisors. Getting certified helps your community become a recognized leader in sustainability. Once certified, you will receive a promotional kit, which includes a badge for your website, job postings, or other uses, as well as a press release template. We will also share your achievement through the Sustainable Pittsburgh communication channels. The Sustainable Pennsylvania website also provides your municipality with a municipal profile for you to use to help inform your residents of the sustainability action and journey that your municipality has taken. Lastly, Sustainable Pennsylvania certification is also recognized on the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development municipal funding applications, which can help a funding application stand out through clear demonstration of sustainability commitments and increase your chance of approval. There are just 4 steps to getting certified. First, you will need to create an account. Use your phone at this time and scan the QR code at the bottom of this slide, and you can actually start your process in getting signed up. You'll scroll down to communities, click create an account, and fill out the page and click sign up. Once you have an account, the next step is to answer all the questions in the program. The program takes the form of an online assessment. The questions are customized for municipalities. You can work with a team of your colleagues to complete this form. And it's a great way to create a sustainability team, which is actually one of the questions in the assessment. Third, after you complete your assessment, submit it, and our staff will provide feedback on your responses that you will then have a chance to address before submitting your final answers. And last, you'll earn bronze, silver, gold, or platinum certification levels based on 2 criteria: the total percentage of points possible that you've earned, and whether or not you've completed the actions required for each level. There's no deadline to participate, and each certification expires after 3 years. Now that you know a little bit more about the program and how to sign up, I've included this table, which includes the required actions specifically for Sustainable Pennsylvania. If you would like to know more about the DE&I related actions in the other programs, feel free to reach out to me. My information will be given at the end of the presentation, as well as in a follow-up email. As shown on this table, Sustainable Pennsylvania has DE&I specific actions in silver, gold, and platinum certification levels. The required actions related to DE&I include: has the municipality written a policy to ensure a wide range of candidates are sought, encouraged to apply, and interviewed for all job openings? This is required for the silver level through our diversity and inclusion hiring policy. The next is, has the municipality developed a strategy or plan to achieve a DE&I vision? This action is required for gold level certification. And lastly, has the municipality annually or periodically assessed or report to the public the diversity of all board members, employees, volunteers, and committees, etc.? And that is going to fulfill the platinum level certification of the diversity and inclusion tracking action. And now I'll hand it back to John to speak on why diversity, equity, and inclusion is important both generally and to Sustainable Pittsburgh. Thank you.
Thank you, Sawyer. We're excited to have you all join us as we explore a crucial and timely topic: the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and practical guidance for communities. So the question is, why are we focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion at this exact moment? At Sustainable Pittsburgh, advancing social equity remains a core priority for our organization and the region. Next slide, please. DE&I is more than just a checkbox on a list. It's foundational to the holistic sustainability, environmental, social, and economic, and resilience of our communities. DE&I means fostering environments where all voices are heard, all residents are valued, and opportunities are accessible to everyone, regardless of background. This is vital for community cohesion and trust between local governments and their residents. As we collectively navigate a new landscape, including rapid policy shifts from the recent executive orders, we must remember that DE&I impacts everyone. Inclusive government leads to better public services, fosters stronger, more competitive communities, and drives long-term social and economic stability. Beyond compliance, municipalities that prioritize DE&I lay the groundwork for a future where everyone thrives. Next slide, please. Inclusive governance leads to better public services, fosters stronger, more competitive communities, and drives long-term social and economic stability. Today's discussion will not only help you navigate the DE&I components of the Sustainable Pennsylvania certification, but also offer insights into building a stronger, more inclusive community in the face of evolving policies. We're going to explore how DE&I can empower our communities to become more resilient, vibrant, and prosperous for all. Our first speaker is Matthew Yohe, Programs and Services Manager at Vibrant Pittsburgh. Next slide, please. Matthew Yohe is a passionate DEI practitioner and serves as the Programs and Services Manager of Vibrant Pittsburgh. At Vibrant Pittsburgh, he facilitates program and event workflow for all aspects of Vibrant Pittsburgh's annual cycle of member and talent community programming and events. Yohe also facilitates training sessions for organizations, equipping them with strategies to cultivate equitable, inclusive, and diverse workplaces. So without further ado, Matthew Yohe.
Thank you so much. As mentioned, hello, my name is Matthew Yohe. My pronouns are he, him, and I serve as a Programs and Services Manager with Vibrant Pittsburgh. I'm so pleased to be here with you all this afternoon and would like to thank Sustainable Pittsburgh for the invitation to be here as well. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Vibrant Pittsburgh is an economic development and workplace inclusion organization in Pittsburgh. Our mission is to accelerate the business community toward equitable, inclusive, and diverse workplaces, creating a future-forward region. And Vibrant Pittsburgh envisions a future where Pittsburgh employers offer inclusive workplaces that foster prosperity and belonging, making them a top choice for people of all backgrounds. And on the next slide here, I'm going to dive into a session overview. So over the next 15 minutes, my presentation will be rooted in the Vibrant Pittsburgh approach to economic development through workplace inclusion. So my focus will be on an organizational and business perspective. With that being said, this presentation will define diversity, inclusion, and belonging while exploring the many dimensions that shape individual and workplace experiences. We'll examine some key data points that demonstrate how diversity and inclusion drive innovation, employee engagement, and business success. And finally, we'll discuss practical steps organizations can take to foster a culture of belonging. My hope is that after this brief session, you will leave with an understanding of the impact that belonging and inclusion and diversity can have on your organization. So next slide here, as mentioned, we are going to start with some definitions, starting with diversity and building on some of that foundational conversation that John just laid down for us on what we're going to cover with DE&I and why it's important here. So that diversity is the representation of all of our varied identities and differences, collectively and as individuals. So such as race, ethnicity, gender, disability status, sexual orientation, national origin, socioeconomic status, thinking and communication styles, and so much more. And work cultures and communities that value diversity proactively engage, understand, and draw upon a variety of perspectives. On the right side of the slide here, you will see the cultural iceberg, a concept introduced by anthropologist Edward T. Hall in 1976. And similar to an iceberg, diversity and culture both have visible and beneath the surface elements. Hall suggested that approximately 90% of culture and identity exist below the surface, shaping who we are, and only about 10% of the dimensions of our diversity and culture are immediately visible or that above the surface area there. However, it is essential to recognize that just because an aspect of our or dimension of our diversity and identity isn't immediately seen doesn't make it any less significant. So as you can see on the right side of the slide here, at that surface level area, we have age, race, physical ability. Again, these are usually visible above the surface, generally speaking. And then below the surface, we have things such as economic status, education, family status, neurodiversity, religious convictions. And again, there's so much more to this below the surface as well. But as you look at this iceberg over here and how different dimensions of identity and diversity fall above and below the surface, I just want you to take a moment about a dimension or multiple dimensions of your identity that really shape how you see things. But maybe that a dimension that others might not notice right away, and think about that in your own life and how it shapes your own experiences, and kind of have that rooted as we go through the rest of this presentation here. So on the next slide, I want just to keep thinking about different dimensions of diversity. Sometimes when we hear the word diversity, we immediately think race, ethnicity, gender, and while those are really important aspects of our identity and diversity, our being is also really complex. So I want to take a moment to highlight this graphic here from Career Place and the various dimensions of diversity that one has within our own being here. So again, from race and ethnicity and gender to zip codes, tattoos, height, family obligations. So just take a moment to look at that slide and see what's on there. Sometimes there's some things on there that are surprising that we didn't really know were kind of those aspects of diversity that make up who we are as well. And life perspectives are shaped by all of our various lived experiences. And each of these dimensions of diversity play a specific role in everyone's unique view of the world. And on the next slide here, continuing to think about our unique identities, I want us to consider how there are some intersections of the different dimensions of our diversity and identity as well. This wheel here, as you see on the slide, is a mechanism used to show how everyone and our identities are included when we talk about diversity. The inner blue circle you see there are characteristics that may be somewhat fixed, that maybe we were born with, that are really close to our innate identity, while the characteristics on the outside circle there may be more so secondary influences. They may be a little bit more fluid. They still really contribute to our identity, but may be more susceptible to change. And thinking about what makes you unique, can help you understand yourself better and see where you fit in this diverse and unique world as well. And on the right side of the slide here, I want to take a moment to define intersectionality. And this term was first introduced by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is an American civil rights advocate and professor at the UCLA School of Law and Columbia School of Law. And intersectionality looks at how the different parts of who you are, like race, ethnicity, gender, and other identities that we outlined, come together to shape your unique experiences. And it's important to note that these intersections of our unique identities can provide different opportunities or challenges in your life as well. So moving on to the next slide here, I have two more definitions that I would like to quickly highlight, and these are inclusion and belonging. Inclusion builds a culture of belonging by actively inviting the contribution and participation of all people. So to put it simply, inclusion is how we treat one another. Belonging is the feelings as a result of inclusive behaviors. So feeling seen, connected, proud, or supported. And belonging is what allows people to feel like they can bring authentic parts of themselves into the workplace without fear of different treatment. And this has a really big impact on performance and retention. And a quote from Lily Zhang, who's a DEI strategist and author, "Belonging is the extent to which people feel part of a larger whole in a group setting. It's a metric by which we measure inclusion." So moving on to the next slide, as we reflect on diversity and its presence in our lives, it's important to recognize how inclusive communities and workplaces benefit everyone. Fostering a culture of belonging allows individuals to really thrive. And data shows that when people feel included and have access to opportunities, they are more likely to drive growth through engagement, innovation, and productivity. Inclusive policies further enhance this impact by harnessing the talents and skills of broad talent communities, ultimately strengthening organizations and communities as a whole. And a quote on this slide here is from the World Economic Forum that states, "Research consistently demonstrates the long-term benefits of inclusive policymaking and sustained diversity and inclusion programs, making inclusion not just a moral imperative, but also a strategic one that promotes sustainable growth and resilience in the face of global risks and challenges." So on the next slide, as organizations and communities strive for growth, diversity and inclusion have become critical factors for driving innovation, improving decision-making, and attracting top talent. So if we can hop over to the next slide real quick, we will look at some key data points that highlight why these efforts are essential. So the first point here is from the Harvard Business Review that found that companies with above average total diversity experience a 19% increase in innovation revenue. This means that diverse teams generate fresh ideas and new solutions and fuel growth for organizations. Next, Gartner research shows that inclusive teams boost performance by up to 35% in high diversity environments. So when employees feel valued and included, they collaborate more effectively and contribute at their highest potential. And last, decision-making also improves with diversity. And a study from CloverPop revealed that diverse teams see a 60% improvement in decision-making. So the ability to consider multiple perspectives can lead to more informed and strategic choices. And if we can move to the next slide, I have just a few more data points here to highlight some of this business case for the work here, because the workforce of today and the future is becoming increasingly diverse across race, ethnicity, and generations as well. And with this, organizations must prioritize building an inclusive workplace that fosters belonging. So here are just a few more data points to highlight. Research from Boston Consulting Group, excuse me, based on data from over 27,000 employees across 16 countries, underscores the powerful impact of inclusive leadership. So when leadership prioritizes inclusion, attrition risk decreases by 50%, as employees who experience discrimination or bias are 1.4 times more likely to quit their jobs. And when employees believe DEI is a leadership priority, overall employee happiness increases by 31 percentage points, and motivation rises by nearly 25 percentage points. So all of this is particularly relevant considering Gallup's 2024 report that specifically found employee engagement in the United States has dropped to its lowest level in a decade, with only about 31% of employees reporting feeling engaged at work. And in this report, they also estimated the cost of disengaged employees in the United States to be at roughly $350 billion per year in lost productivity. So again, as we're thinking about why does this matter? Well, an inclusive workplace where employees feel valued and have that sense of belonging, again, leads to higher job satisfaction and lower turnover, and even beyond engagement and retention. Diverse teams and inclusive workplaces drive better business outcomes. They are more creative, more diligent, work harder, connect with wider audiences more effectively, and more likely to generate fresh ideas, original content, products, and services, and draw upon inspiration from a broad range of backgrounds and perspectives as well. So ultimately, organizations that align their mission and values with employee well-being will set themselves up for success. And if we can move to the next slide. As we look at this work kind of hyper-locally to Southwestern Pennsylvania, diversity and inclusion are essential to creating a sustainable and thriving workforce in our region. There are a few strategic focus areas that I want to highlight here as we look to continue to build an inclusive region. And as we think about this regionally in Southwestern Pennsylvania, I want to introduce the Vibrant Index and highlight some key data points and findings from this initiative as well. So the Vibrant Index is a free annual diagnostic tool that identifies areas of success, as well as what critical actions are needed to improve the practices, policies, and cultures of organizations in the Pittsburgh and surrounding region. And this is done across 9 pillar areas of assessment. The Vibrant Index encourages companies to reflect on best practices while investigating opportunities as well. And the Vibrant Index is designed to provide an annual snapshot of the best practices being utilized by employees in the Pittsburgh region. So again, I'll dive into some information from the Vibrant Index, but just wanted to set the scene with that as well. So with that being said, the first strategic focus area that I want to highlight is workforce sustainability. According to the US Census data, 21% of the population of Allegheny County is 65 or older, with an even higher proportion in rural communities, which I think one of our other speakers will be touching on later. Between 2014 and 2019, the population of Pittsburgh actually decreased by 1.3%. However, the immigrant population in the city of Pittsburgh grew by almost 19%, according to the American Immigration Council. So with an aging population and a slight decrease in overall population, we can see the importance of what the next step here is of attracting and retaining talent in our region as well. And with that, as we think about the future of our work, we must recognize that inclusive workplaces are a key driver of attracting and retaining talent. Talent wants to be a part of a region where they feel welcomed, valued, and supported. So whether it's through fostering an inclusive culture in the workplace or creating a sense of belonging in the community, both of which are very important. Southwestern Pennsylvania also has the potential to attract from broad talent communities and retain that talent that comes through our higher education institutions to ensure that they remain in the region and can contribute to its long-term success. And also having inclusive workplaces and belonging that foster growth for the immigrant population that's coming into our community as well. And then with leadership commitment, another really important driver of inclusion is that commitment by leadership. It has been shown that top-down support from leadership is essential in making meaningful change within organizations. I highlighted a few key data points on the previous slide from Boston Consulting Group regarding inclusive leadership, but also the Vibrant Index, as I mentioned, has some firsthand data on this. So the last iteration of the Vibrant Index that Vibrant Pittsburgh hosted was 5.0 and was completed in 2024 by 100 employer organizations in the region, representing 185,000 full-time employees, or roughly 16% of the labor force in the Pittsburgh region. The data from the 2024 Vibrant Index 5.0 showed that within the leadership pillar area of assessment, organizations where executive leaders signed a DEI pledge or other commitment to upholding an inclusive workplace scored on average 15 points higher across the entire Vibrant Index assessment compared to those scores of organizations where leaders didn't have a signed formal pledge or commitment. So the impact of executive commitment extends beyond simply signing a pledge. The findings indicate that a significant return on investment for companies integrate diversity and inclusion at the highest levels within their strategic planning as well. And if you're interested in learning more about the Vibrant Index, you can visit vibrantpittsburgh.org, and Vibrant Index 6.0 is actually open right now for organizations to participate in as well. If we can move to the next slide here, as I wrap things up, I want to leave you all with just a few actions to consider as you look at some of these features of inclusive workplaces, starting with commitment to belonging and inclusion. Fostering psychological safety in the workplace is really important. People need to feel safe to express themselves without fear of judgment or retaliation. And encourage participation. Create spaces at your organization where all voices are valued and heard, especially those from historically underrepresented groups. Next, clear communication. Think about accessible communication. Use clear, inclusive language that avoids jargon, and practice active listening, and also be mindful of body language. And create a feedback culture. Provide opportunities for open and constructive feedback in all directions. And also, if you're asking for feedback, make sure you're ready to act on that feedback as well. Next, empathy-driven leadership. Again, tying into active listening. Leaders need to make a genuine effort to understand the experiences and perspectives of the individuals that make up their organizations. And be adaptable. Policies and practices need to be adjusted to meet the diverse needs of our workforce. And lastly, recognition of individual and collective contributions. Celebrate achievements, acknowledge both individual and team successes in meaningful ways. And microaffirmations. Think about small but meaningful acts of inclusion and recognition, such as giving credit and acknowledging the contribution of others, and positive praise that help counteract bias and foster that sense of belonging in the workplace. So with that, we can move to the last slide here, which is closing out. And I just want to thank you all for your time, for being here, for being part of this work. Again, for Sustainable Pittsburgh, to invite us to be here. And today, if you would like to connect with Vibrant Pittsburgh, there are ways on the screen to do so across social media channels. But thank you again, and I will turn things back over to John.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Next speaker is Joshua Ash. He is the Director of Environmental Law and Policy of the Environmental Law and Policy Clinic at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law, where he leads sustainability efforts, including policy, litigation, and business. He collaborates with university partners to integrate DEI principles and educate future lawyers. In his spare time, he serves as a council member of the ABA section of Environment, Energy, and Resources, and is a former co-chair of its Membership Diversity Enhancement Program. Thank you so much, Joshua. Please continue.
Okay, hi everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for that introduction. So, next slide, please. So I wanted to just quickly give you a roadmap for what I was hoping to bring to this conversation. And the first was actually not necessarily the point at first, but there's this a lot going on in the DEI space right now, and a lot of burning questions that we thought you all might have. So I'm going to start this presentation with some general legal updates on where things are at, what's going on, and specifically with the legal lens. Then the next part of the presentation is going to really try to focus into the audience that was intended for this presentation specifically, which was municipal government entities, and what the DEI space means for you, and how you can fit this whole presentation, this context, into some sort of tangible efforts. And then the closing part of this presentation is, what does a tangible effort look like in terms of putting pen to paper, putting a D&I plan together, and making sure that you're not going to hit any roadblocks when you do so. Next slide, please. Okay, so very high level, Diversity, equity, and inclusion in the law updates. There's a few things that I think are important to hit home here. The first of which was a case recently called at the Supreme Court, which was called Students for Fair Housing. I'm guessing if you're in this space a little bit, you've probably heard about it. It had to do with college admissions and affirmative action. And I think it's fair to say that this decision alarmed a lot of people. But for reasons I'll go into, I think its impact is not quite as far-reaching as you might think. So just a really quick little background, because I think it's important. This case was about admissions practices at Harvard and UNC, and essentially, after doing a heavy analysis of those practices, they were deemed unconstitutional due to a violation of the the Equal Protection Clause in the Fourth Amendment, as well as Title VI. And all that being said, they didn't deem race-conscious admissions unconstitutional entirely, but rather they, if you do get into the details, they classified what strict scrutiny would be entail in a much more detailed and more difficult test to pass. So a few takeaways here that might actually apply to you. First, this decision applies to public universities, so not private employers, nor does it apply to hiring for municipal governments, which are still governed by employment discrimination laws. And secondly, it's not impossible, just more complicated for colleges to be in this space with racial considerations in their admissions. And there's many, many, many things that can still be done. Two other quick cases that don't necessarily come up as often, but if you remember when that case was issued, there were two others that happened almost simultaneously. One of them was Biden versus Nebraska, which was basically overruling the Biden administration's attempts to cancel out student loans. And then the second was Creative LLC, which was about essentially a company's free speech to deny, and that the facts of that case was a gay couple, and whether or not a private entity that made websites could be compelled to provide services to that gay couple, which the Supreme Court held that that was a First Amendment situation, and that that company has sort of a framed in a sort of odd way, a free amendment right to discriminate, I suppose. So all these kind of came together in a very sort of some might say deflating wave of updates at the time. But again, these all tend to be very, everything has its implications that really matter, and then there are these sort of indirect implications for the sort of the vibe and the DI support for DI generally. So all those are isolated in their own way, but I did want to bring them up because they might be on everyone's mind. Secondly, there have been an absolutely enormous amount of executive orders issued recently, and I'll talk about that on the next slide, but I just wanted to put a flag here that there's a lot of them. To what extent they matter, we can get into that. And then as of yet, there have been no immediately applicable attacks on DEI proposed at the federal level, passed by Congress or in Pennsylvania for that matter, but there certainly have been a lot of pretty wild proposed pieces of legislation. Not that I would, they're all, I guess, it's not the point of this presentation, but I just wanted to let you know that they are there. But they don't matter until they matter. And in many ways, I think they're very much meant to just be a sort of a political stunt more than anything else. So I don't want to give them too much credit or time, to be honest. So next slide, please. So what's the big picture here and what actually matters for you? This is a good old Schoolhouse Rock diagram that I think is, you might be asking, why is this necessary? But I think I use these all the time because I think it's useful to compartmentalize what's happening at each level of government, in kind of buckets, who actually has the authority over what and what really matters. So I'm going to first start with the executive branch and these executive orders that I mentioned. So you'll see the ones that are crossed out in the top right-hand corner. That was everything that the Biden administration had done. And, if you're not familiar with executive orders, it's very normal for one president to revoke what the prior president did. But the Biden administration had taken really some pretty phenomenal and uh, forward-looking steps in DEI in some of these EOs. So there was one called Federal Actions to Address Environmental Justice, one for no discrimination on sexual orientation and gender in the federal government, DEI and A in federal government, and advancing racial equity through underserved communities. All of those, like any executive order, were essentially just re-articulations of, the president's existing responsibilities. But they really provided some great leadership that we hadn't seen in a long time. So then you move into really just in the last 3 weeks, there have been an insane amount of executive orders to keep up with. So I probably don't have the time to get all of them today, but the ones that I've listed here, and I'm just going to go through their names real quick. So there's um, restoring freedom of speech and ending federal censorship, ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs, reforming the federal hiring process and restoring merit, ending illegal discrimination, restoring merit-based opportunity, an executive order questioning FEMA's authority and how it does what it does, an executive order on trans children, an executive order on radical indoctrination of K through 12 schools, and then a unleashing prosperity through deregulation memo. So that can be a little daunting to keep up with, but I think in general, like I said, an executive order is a re-articulation of existing powers that the president has as given from Congress, or the very few powers that a president alone has. So, if you take each one of these, the naming something, if you go through these, like naming radical and wasteful in the title of a DEI executive order doesn't necessarily make it radical or wasteful at all. Putting illegal discrimination in the name doesn't mean it's illegal. And, I could go on, but really it's just, these have a very isolated kind of political emphasis that really trickles down into more confusion and less actual legal ramifications. So let's see here. The next part here is in the legislative branch. I just wanted to re-emphasize finally here that there is some legislation that really matters for diversity, equity, inclusion. Title V or Title VII of the Civil Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act in general is, absolutely a, pillar in a lot of these conversations, and it didn't go anywhere and it's still there. So that's, hopefully this is kind of a well-rounded picture of where we're at, what really changed and what didn't. But next slide, please. But all that being said, I do think it'd be prudent to point out three things to think about. So one of them is federal funding. As we work with municipal governments all the time, especially in the last 4 years, where there's been some really great federal funding opportunities. And it's really exciting to see what municipal governments are doing with those in the sustainability space and the environmental justice space. And that is all extremely unpredictable right now. And I think DEI efforts are somewhat in that umbrella of unpredictability, but it certainly, I don't think, is a means to, or a reason to not do any of the things we're talking about today. And quite frankly, federal funding is just in a sort of unpredictable spot generally right now. The second thing is environmental justice work is similarly kind of in a weird space at the federal level where you have a federal executive leadership that really doesn't support these efforts in the way that the prior administration did. So there is some level of unpredictability with if you're getting federal funding for those efforts. Again, absolutely not to say you shouldn't do them, but it's just worth noting. And then finally, there's a lot of discussion recently around reverse discrimination claims, which honestly, I think is more of a scare tactic than actually any substantive change in law that you have to really be concerned here. But I just think it's on everybody's mind and it was worth reiterating. So next slide, please. So all that being said, here we are hopefully talking about some exciting, meaningful, tangible things that you can do. And this is a slide that I think is helpful to just point you in the right direction. If we had all the time in the world, it'd be really exciting to get into the details of everything you do. But what this actually came out of was when I was working with the American Bar Association on some of their DEI efforts. We had this phrase that I think really stuck with me, which was how to ingrain DEI in the DNA of everything the ABA does. And I think that same concept can be really enlightening for a municipal government in thinking, how do you ingrain DEI in everything you do? And this graph is a really, really high level and honestly not nearly comprehensive as it should be effort of all the things that matter for you as a all the things you do as a municipal government. Next slide, please. So if you're at a space where you were really taking it seriously and thinking about putting DEI efforts into a DEI plan, this is just a framework that I would encourage you to think through moving through that. So as in any policy, this is just a good way that we heavy hit this all the time. And it's really astounding how people can get off track here, but it's kind of very simple to think, okay, goal, think about the barriers to implementing that goal, find solutions to those barriers, and put it in a policy. But you'd be surprised how many policies sort of get muddled in that. And then very specifically, they have a goal and they have a policy, but there's this gap between the potential barriers to getting to that goal, and actually really teasing out how those barriers are addressed in a policy. So I think this is really, really valuable to think about in the DEI space, especially, among other reasons, because as affirmative action and things like that, are very much goal and without more focus on the goal and less focus on the barrier. Where it's just like after a lot of lessons learned in this space, there's a lot of value to focusing on identifying barriers to those goals instead and making that your focus. So next slide, please. So I was just going to close with kind of an illustration or example of what that goal barrier solution might look like. And again, here's the goals that you might have in mind: diversity, equity, inclusion. They mean very distinct things. And if we were all in a room and we had a lot of time, it'd be really interesting to hear input on what you all do and all the various moving pieces that you add to the community. And then secondarily, think where you might have what you see as potential barriers to access in the things that you do, or potential barriers and imbalances and opportunities via you as a gatekeeper to government services and resources. So that can be a really great spot to start these conversations and start articulating these. Next slide, please. So just to close, I think anybody can really do this as a municipal government. It's very self-reflective, and I'd encourage anybody to take those steps. But I wanted to leave you with the thought that there's a lot of resources out there to help you through these things and to put pen to paper in policies. The clinic that I run is certainly happy to do that. I think you'll hear from other folks on this call that do this as well. So there's a lot of resources out there, and hopefully this was just a bit of a nugget to point you in the right direction and to give you some inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joshua. Our final speaker is Janine Cristiano, who is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Race Forward, where she strengthens collaborations to advance racial equity in government. She leads the GARE Economic Mobility Initiative and the Bloomberg Sustainable Cities Project, and is involved in several communities focused on racial equity and democracy. With over 16 years of experience in nonprofit and government sectors, she has worked on initiatives related to economic justice, the arts, and community development. So without further ado, Janine.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction and the invitation here. And yeah, thank you to my co-panelists for kind of making my job easy. This is great. You have really set the foundation for my talk. And basically, I'll just be giving a little bit of an overview and an introduction to what GARE is. Then we'll be going into the ties between equity and sustainability and how that ties into being an effective public servant, as Joshua mentioned earlier, and just, solid program and policy implementation. And then I'll share some resources that we've developed that will hopefully be helpful. So with further ado, can we go to the next slide? Great. So GARE is a peer-to-peer learning and practice network. We have over 400 local, regional, and state jurisdictions, 13,000 individual practitioners, all networked and supported by a small staff and our partners. And so we gather folks in our online community in person to share insights, best practices, to support each other, to learn from each other, and to strengthen the field of equity in government. All right, next slide. And so our vision and mission. So we envision a vibrant, just, multiracial democracy where local, regional, and state governments work for everyone, and race no longer determines your life outcome. Our mission is to foster critical connections, shared learning, and leadership development to build skills, influence, capacity, and accountability that build racial equity. And as Matthew pointed out earlier about the importance of intersectionality, we are race explicit, but we are not race exclusive. We always bring an intersectional lens to our work. Next slide. And so our practitioners in the field work to strengthen and steward our public goods. As I said, so those things about our identity and our life are, for example, your race, class, gender, sexuality, disability, migration status, zip code do not impact, do not negatively impact your life. So we really want vibrant communities and lives for everyone. Next slide, please. So, we truly believe that applying an equity lens is essential for effective public administration that benefits the entire community. And, this has been mentioned in the previous presentations. And I'll go a little bit, we'll walk you through a couple examples about, how this can play out in your work and in the community. Next slide, please. And so this is really important. I really want to touch on why GARE leads with race. So racial inequities are deep and pervasive, and they're woven through our culture, our systems, and our institutions. Race is consistently a primary indicator of a person's success and wellness in society, from infant mortality to income and life expectancy as well. By targeting racial inequities and recognizing the structural interplay between all oppressions, we can leverage resources to challenge multiple forms of inequity and create an equitable and just society for all. Institutional and structural approaches create sustainable and enduring change. And so that's why we focus on the structural as our strategy. Next slide, please. And so to talk about the GARE approach, we begin with visualizing this. So again, like what, coming together, in your teams and in community, and to talk about what that just multiracial society looks like. And then we normalize that. We normalize that through conversations and through trainings and discussions about, just to get these terms that could be new or different, really to familiarize those terms, in a group or community. Then we organize. We make sure that we gather the people who need to be in a room to have these regular discussions. We make plans, we set goals, and then that leads to the operationalizing of our work. And so this is when we set into motion those programs and policies. And so this is our approach, and for shorthand, we call it VNU, but it's, visualize, normalize, organize, and operationalize. All right, next slide, please. Great. And so, equity and sustainability. So how understanding and addressing the differences creates thriving, sustainable communities for everyone. All right, next slide. So I wanted to ground us in actually Sustainable Pittsburgh's definition, which is that sustainability is a comprehensive approach that simultaneously integrates social equity, environmental stewardship, and economic prosperity in decision-making. And this is really solid and comprehensive, and tie it to some of the other definitions that we have incorporated as well. So next slide, please. This is from our partner, the Urban Institute, and we incorporate their upward mobility framework in our work. And so there are lots of overlaps. A thriving life, is created with multiple things. So we include dignity and belonging, economic success, and power and autonomy. And then if you look at the banner above, that race equity is woven through, this definition. And we truly believe that race equity is necessary for all people and communities to prosper, especially those who have been excluded by structural inequities. And if I won't spend too much on this slide, but if you take a look at the various pillars below, the three-part definition, you'll see environmental quality and, various things, rewarding work. All of these things we feel are important to, to that thriving and full life. All right, next slide. And similarly, this is our race equity tool. And I believe it was Joshua who had his had a similar kind of action plan. And many of our members adapt this to, within their, local jurisdictions, but this is the general framework. And it's very much tied to the, to a targeted universalist approach, which we use as well. They're kind of, there's some slight differences, but we can use them together depending on your locality. One might be more effective than the other, but there's a lot of overlap between the two. So just really quickly, you select your desired results, you incorporate data, you make sure you engage the community, you create strategies, you implement the plan, you make sure that you communicate that out and have accountability. Next slide. And then so similarly with targeted universalism, it's about setting these large universal goals and then assessing the general population to see where folks are responding differently to the goal. Then you assess and understand the structures that support or impede the group, and then you figure out some strategies to make sure you get to that goal, right? Next slide. And I'm going to just take you through an example from Seattle's public utilities. So, to show this example of this concept in action. So they set a broad universal goal, zero waste. They analyzed the data, and they found that Korean restaurants were non-compliant with solid waste regulations at higher rates than other communities. So through outreach to 20 Korean-owned restaurants, SB learned that their lack of compliance was a simple difference in how compost was defined in Seattle versus their home country. Then they engaged in community engagement and created targeted solutions. So after realizing the terms food waste and compost were conflated, they quickly pivoted and were able to create different education programs and signage, and were able to address that that barrier and move closer to that universal goal. All right, next slide. And I'm just going to, so without a framework like targeted universalism or a race equity tool, barriers to community goals can remain, and certain communities can be disproportionately impacted. And I'm going to quickly go through just one more example in a more rural context. Okay, next slide. Okay, so next slide. Great. So thinking about a more rural community, you could still set universal goals. And I was taking a look and I found that, in Pennsylvania, you all have done this work, and there are many organizations that you could look to that are kind of following this, this framework. So setting that universal goal of a thriving, sustainable economy, for example. All right, next slide. And then assessing and analyzing the local data. And this is again, local to Pennsylvania. That migration has been driving the population growth, and that Pennsylvania is aging and population in general shrinking. Next slide. And so here I'll make sure that these get to you as resources, but these are tools that also help us understand our communities. So we have our upward mobility metrics, our economic mobility catalog, and our opportunity and social capital atlases. You'll get the links to all of these. They're amazing tools to understand like the nuances of your community. And next slide, please. So what we know from the data, as mentioned earlier, there's population loss. There is, with nearly 50% of rural counties in the US seeing a decrease in population. There's economic impact with rural employers finding it difficult to find workers, and demographic shifts. As mentioned earlier, rural areas have a higher proportion of elderly residents. Younger people are leaving the area, but the growth is being driven by immigrant communities. All right, next slide. And so a targeted strategy to address, the current situation and get to that universal goal could be something like what they've done in Wisconsin, which is strengthening supports. So, which is a program supporting Hmong farmers, and helping them, create farms and supporting them through education and outreach. So this is just one example, to get to that universal goal. And next slide. So I'm just going to go quickly through a few resources and you'll get the links to all of these. All right, next slide. So we have an online community with various ways to engage and also topic guides. One of them being in environmental justice. All right, next slide. All right, there you go. And so we, love you to check this out. Maybe, we engage in a training or one of our in-person events. All right, next slide. And also, as mentioned earlier, we just launched a racial equity legal initiative, with drop-in hours. Our next one is going to be March 13th, and you can register through the GARE community, but it sounds very similar to the clinic that Joshua mentioned earlier. So this one, is online, and yeah, we welcome you to join our community and take part in this if you have those specific questions that you're working through in your jurisdiction. All right, next slide, please. We also have many ways to engage, learning exchanges, etc. And yeah, and we'll get all of these to you in a follow-up email, but I think I want to make sure we get to your questions. So let's, yeah, I think I'll wrap up here, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Janine. And thank you, Matthew and Joshua, as well. We would like to ask all our speakers to please turn their cameras back on and join us for a Q&A session regarding the topic spoken about today. Once again, if you have a question for Sustainable Pittsburgh or any of our speakers, please put your questions in the Q&A box. So first question, it's kind of directed at everyone. How can advocates for this impact, advocates for DEI, impact local municipalities that are being pushed by anti-DEI proponents?
I might first just quickly say that one of the things I believe is really important right now is to not yet let this chilling effect impact things that it doesn't need to impact. You see this in a lot of different policy spaces in sort of this back and forth with the current administration in climate or environmental justice or any environmental thing really. But there's what actually happened, and then there's what everybody thinks happened, which is much larger. So I would just, really remind and encourage everybody to be excited and confident about DEI efforts and not to sort of lean into the doom and gloom of current vibes. So.
Would anyone else like to also answer?
I'll jump in real quick with this one. So as we're looking at the proponents to some of the work that's being done, I think it's also important to consider how language is being used within this field, within the work that we're doing and that others are doing. If we look on kind of a national stage at organizations where we see these rollbacks from DEI, we also still see an emphasis on belonging. So we see some of these big corporations that maybe in the headlines say they're rolling back DEI efforts, but then say they're kind of finding that cornerstone and belonging at organizations. And as I highlighted, belonging is that end result we're looking to get from inclusive cultures. So I think sometimes when we look at language and how it's being used, we just really need to kind of dissect what the end goal is there and try to see how we can get people aligned on that as well.
I might add also something to think about if you're an advocate dealing with the municipal government, is that we see all the time this sort of hot potato of authority and responsibility, and that we live in this system where there's many levels of government, and it's any government worker, you're super busy, you have a million responsibilities that overlap with other people, and it's very common, I've seen, for folks to be reluctant to take on things that they think another branch might do. But we're at a particular time where I think we really lost a lot of top-down leadership. And now more than ever, I'm a big fan of local governments doing anything in the sustainability space. But if there ever was a time for them to shine, like now is that time. And I think it really applies in the DEI space as well.
Excellent. So the next question comes from somebody who works in one of the boroughs right outside of the city of Pittsburgh, out near the Allegheny Valley, Mon Valley area. Her question is, my position in local government is nonpartisan. Is it politically correct to continue DEI training?
I'll jump in, but I'm actually gonna, point out Matthew's business case for it. I mean, I think, from the information that was presented, I think it's so clear that this, DE&I training, understanding, the benefits of diversity and equity inclusion makes you a better and more effective government employee, a public servant. And so, I mean, I would just keep going back to the data and keep going back to the benefits, those universal benefits for everyone in the community, for you to, continue the training and the implementation of this type of work.
I have another comment on that too. I think something that in the sustainability space generally, there's kind of two ways to frame almost everything that local governments do in this space. And one of them is very much like, we need to do this for climate crisis reasons, we need to do this for equity, etc. And you could almost do the exact same set of objectives, but just in this economic development, good for the economy mindset. And as we are sort of in this space where we're transitioning into a green economy, and a lot of it is just around framing. And I think diversity, equity, inclusion fits in that too, in that there's so much economic redevelopment work and green economic development work to be done. And that comes off very bipartisan. Like everybody cares about the economy. And I would say one party in particular actually cares, that's just a really heavy hitting issue. So the more you can remember just that you have a very important goal as a local government in this economic transition and community development. And you just have a responsibility to make sure everybody's a part of that conversation. There's no sort of other agenda there, but you have a big job to do and you need to make sure that everybody's involved in it.
Absolutely. I'll just ask one more question here. So kind of in lieu of these looming federal funding gaps, what do you think municipalities can do to fill these gaps, especially when it comes around to funding programming, funding initiatives locally for DEI programs and things that are similar like that? Who can they turn to essentially for some funding support?
Well, my one comment here would be there's a lot of resources out there for assisting with funding right now. Like it's something that our clinic does. It's something that the Southwest Municipality Hub does. Connect. I could probably name like a dozen. A lot of people in this space that know federal funding opportunities and know how to get them. And I think everybody in that world is also very conscious of the reframing that I just talked about in repivoting to do the same things, but just kind of put it in the lens that it needs to be in from, at this particular juncture we're at. And there's resources to help you do that aplenty. So.
Great. So thank you all for coming today and speaking. We're going to have a few more points before we go. Next slide. We have some upcoming events that will be of interest to everybody here. Join Sustainable Pittsburgh on March 25th for a comprehensive overview of the Sustainable Pennsylvania Municipal Certification Program and hear how it has helped municipalities create and achieve sustainability goals, empowering them to save money, conserve resources, and innovate. Learn more about the benefits of earning recognition, including improving grant eligibility, tracking and measuring sustainability progress, access to a community of peers, technical assistance, and connections to resources that can support resilient, thriving, and healthy communities for all residents. Also, save the date for the April 10th SCDN Policy Connection. More details are coming. And of course, for more information on these and other sustainability-focused events, visit sustainablepittsburgh.org/take-action/events. Thank you for joining us, and please contact us if you have any questions or want to dig deeper into DE&I. We plan to share a survey in the coming weeks to collect some vital information for our upcoming webinars. When you see that survey, please respond as your feedback is valued and helps us to shape our programming. We'll circulate the resources shared today and hope you'll reach out to us if you have any questions or want to learn more about DE&I and more opportunities to advance sustainability within your communities and organizations. Thank you all for coming.